City ratio and polarity test with voltage. To perform ratio test, you can use ratio and polarity test with voltage tab 2. In this tab, tests including turn ratio, polarity, and phase movement between CT primary and secondary with voltage are performed. In performing these tests, AC voltage is applied to CT secondary and primary voltage is measured through analog input. To perform this test, you need to enter test voltage and time in VTest and state time field in a state setting respectively. Note that this test must be performed after excitation test because the applied voltage must be in the CT linear areas. Before starting the test, some points must be taken into account. First, in this test, the voltage is applied from the secondary and measured from the primary. 2. If you wish to remove the noise from the result, check at calibration state option. By checking this option in a state before the test, the input voltage is measured and deducted from the result. Generally, in table view, you can view the states that are created by the software. As you can see, 5 states are created. In the first state, 30 volts is applied. The actual is measured and calibration factor is obtained from the difference between these two so that the test voltage is more accurate during the test. Note that while applying this voltage, the switches are open and no voltage is applied to the CT. The second state is related to at calibration state. The fourth state is the specified test voltage, and the third and fifth states are half and double the test voltage respectively, which are created to measure the test state of the primary voltage. Note that this is why the maximum voltage limit is 220 volts. In voltage measured mode, the input is specified to measure the voltage. Note that this item changes automatically according to the test voltage and turns ratio is specified in test object. After entering the state setting information, you need to do the wiring according to the picture. Note that by double-clicking on it, you can maximize it. In this wiring, VA1 must be connected to S1, while N must be connected to S2, and then a wire must be connected to input 10 for measurement after passing through the CT. After doing the wiring, 50 volts and 1 second are entered as test voltage and test time for CT protection 500/1, and after pressing init test, the test starts. In signal view, the waveform of the voltage along with its actual value and the measured voltage can be viewed. After the test is finished, the results can be viewed in turns ratio result. V actual, V measured, and turns ratio nominal are the actual value of the fed voltage, the measured voltage, and the CT nominal turns ratio respectively. Also, turns ratio act is measured by comparing V measured and V actual, and finally the assessment is recorded in assessment field in accordance with the difference between turns ratio act and turns ratio nom. If the difference is less than the allowed value in the standard, the test passes, otherwise it fails. Here, since the error percentage is less than the specified value in the standard, the test is passed. This test is assessed in the way that when you specify a test voltage, the current is measured according to the burden entered in test object, and after performing the test and measuring the turns ratio error percentage, the result is compared with the current standards table and assessed. In phase nominal field, in phase section, the phase and in phase act, the measured phase are specified. In phase deviation, by comparing phase act and phase nominal, the error is calculated in minutes and assessment is specified in assessment field. Polarity check field in polarity section checks the correctness of the polarity. Finally, after the test is performed, it is necessary to add the assessment to the report, which is done by pressing Add to Report. Also, if you wish to add some specified parts to the report or delete the report, you can use Add to Report cog. Note that if the test has been performed using inputs and outputs other than the default settings, first you need to click on Init Test and then check Don't Change Hardware Setting, and by going to Hardware Configuration, in Analog Output, activate phases of the intended voltage group and deactivate the rest and perform the tests using the intended voltage group. Here, voltage group A is deactivated and voltage group B is activated, and instead of input 10, input 8 is selected and the necessary settings is adjusted. No test is performed in Mega tab. This section is designed so that you can enter Mega test result and gather all results in one report. You can enter the number of rows and columns that you need in rows and column fields respectively, and by clicking on Insert, make your intended table and the results are added to the inserted fields. Also, in Title field, you can enter a title for your test. Finally, after all the tests are performed and the results are added to the report, in Report View it is possible to view the report as a whole. By right-clicking and selecting Reorder Reports, it is possible to change the arrangements of different test results. To do this, you need to select your intended report, and by using up and down keys move the report, or by using Delete, delete it. Furthermore, if you wish to delete the added report or edit the entered information, you can use the blue option named Edit and Delete Report.